So I know that comic book properties and comic book movies have name dropped or referenced superhero tropes and other aspects of competitors' IP in the past, like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, and May had that "you're not Superman," line, and that was cute for the time. And I know like a lot of other comic book properties kind of pay lip service or homage to the big companies like DC or Marvel. I want someone to try and clarify this for me. Is this the first time that an MCU film has directly name-dropped DC characters? Like, I know the MCU relies on a lot of its characters to drop pop culture references to movies and TV shows, but is this the first time that an MCU film has outright compared someone by name to Batman, Alfred Pennyworth, and Superman? It's just a stray observation I had while watching Eternals. Not positive, not negative, just a curiosity. So let's now talk about the positives and negatives of Eternals. A brief blurb about my general thoughts about the film, because I will get into some more spoiler-ish territory as I go along here. So right here out of the gate, if you're still curious to watch this movie, please go do so. Overall, I think it is a very average installment in the MCU. I thought this was very middling, very right down the middle, fine. I do have some criticisms about pacing, about the greater themes in storytelling and characterization. But overall, there's solid visual spectacle here. There's consistent performances, aside from maybe just one outlier. And if anything, I want more Chloe Zhao helmed projects after watching Eternals. I want to see her go buck wild on more ideas and stories that don't necessarily have to be adhering to a corporate IP such as Marvel and Disney. The thing Marvel's been doing is taking a lot of these directors when they're in the midst of their hot streak and placing them into these bigger franchises. And to be fair, Chloe did kind of seek out this bigger project and is responsible for a lot of the world building and storytelling aspects of this particular franchise. And I'm sure Marvel was very excited to work with her. So there's ambition in this film. Some of it works in the smaller ideas or smaller subplots. A lot of it feels a little kind of overwhelming and confounding, but again, it's more ambitious than an Iron Man 2 or a Thor the Dark World. It's average, it's fine. And also, this is my weariness of superhero film properties overall speaking, where I'm just kind of like, over the past couple years, I've been slowly tapping out in terms of investment in Marvel or DC or any other comic book property coming to the screen. And I'm just kind of like, whatever. Marvel will be fine. If Eternals succeeds or blunders, they have a plan and they've stuck to this plan and adapted the plan. And I'll explain a little bit more of how that plan can continue and adapt even if Eternals doesn't pull in the numbers that they were hoping for. I love the visual palette of this. It doesn't read like a lot of the other Marvel films visually. And I do like that. I do like that there's a little bit more breadth and scope to Chloe's cinematic eye for this property in terms of the settings, in terms of the designs. I do like that. And I don't know if this is Chloe's aesthetic choice or if it is sort of just the mandated kind of Marvel color palette neutrality that does show up a lot through these movies. But I was trying to imagine, like, if only they let it be a little bit more vibrant in terms of its color scheme. But for what we do get, I do appreciate the scope of it. It works. Performances, I felt, are fairly consistent throughout, with one outlier, which I'll get to here in a second. But again, these are a race of immortal beings that came to Earth thousands of years ago at the behest of their masters, the Celestials, to protect the planet from a predatory race called the Deviants. And so they do that. They have a falling out within their own team about what to do next and drift through the centuries of humanity and human civilization developing until modern times where they have to reassemble, much like a certain avenging team that they name drop constantly throughout the movie, to deal with a bigger global threat. It is an ensemble movie, but there is a focus on especially two leads. And the leads, I'm sorry to say, as much as I like the actor and actress portraying them, I wish they were a little bit more interesting in terms of their characters. Gemma Chan, who was in a previous Marvel film as another character, plays Cersei. As the film's narrative progresses, becomes more of the heart and soul of the team and of the film overall. They try to play up sort of a Wonder Woman kind of parallel here, in that throughout the film, it's explained to us that Cersei, I guess, is the Eternal who has the biggest capacity for connecting and empathizing with humanity. And I wish that was justified in the actual storytelling and in the actual visual cues that they would give us for showing that she's invested in humanity, other than some cinematic shorthand in the form of montages and flashbacks where we see her briefly interacting with humans, giving a little kid who just lost his dad a knife, and that makes the kid feel better, I guess, dancing with them at a party and braiding a girl's hair, I think. We're not really given a lot of insight into Cersei's supposed connection or deep connection to humanity. We briefly see her as a teacher, and we briefly see that she is dating Kit Harington from Game of Thrones. There's no consistent through line with that relationship or that role. He shows up at the beginning as sort of the audience avatar that she explains the predicament to. She introduces him to the world of the Eternals, and then goes off to do the mission and kind of leaves him in the dust. Reconnects with him briefly over the phone, and then he shows up again at the very end. And that's really it. There's no deeper sense of why this relationship is so powerful or strong, or why this could perhaps represent her deep connection to humanity. The only reason me as an audience member gets a gleaming of, oh, well, she's the one who will bring things together because she loves humanity so much, is because the movie just outright exposits that. And it would have been nice, especially for an actress like Gemma Chan, to be able to show off that connection a little bit more so through other than brief exposition, and other than briefly having to spoon feed it to the audience that she's the one who cares the most. Richard Madden, the other Stark brother in this movie, plays Ikaris. And yes, there is a flying too close to the sun parallel, which kind of doesn't work. And again, it's based off my interpretation of the Legend of Ikaris. The original Legend of Ikaris is about overambition and wanting to strive for something beyond your capacity, perhaps, and paying the price as a result of that. This Ikaris, Marvel Ikaris, he is through and through just the G-man. He is there to fulfill his duty and nothing else. He has no ambition other than serving his masters, and that's pretty much consistent throughout the film, even as a reveal plays out that I saw coming, which is yeah, of course, this guy's not going to deviate from this century-spanning plan that the Celestials have. He has shown no desire to want to branch out, and it shows very apparently in Madden's performance. I'm sorry, I like Richard Madden in Game of Thrones. He is dull in this movie. He is very dull, and even the eventual reveal of the character's true nature, which was there from the get-go, it didn't play as this, oh my gosh, everything's different now. It's just, it landed with a thud for me. So he's definitely the weaker of the co-leads in terms of that. And again, it's not his fault. It's because the character has no room for growth in an ensemble piece where focus has to be diverted all the time to these other characters, and him as one of the focal characters still doesn't have a lot to chew on. And again, it's kind of his connection to Cersei that we're supposed to invest in, they're lovers that span centuries. The first Marvel sex scene, sure, this thing's been touted up in the media so much as being oh man, Marvel's finally going into some risque territory. Let me just say this. Marvel and its aversion for showing prolonged scenes of physical intimacy certainly has been an issue, but this particular moment in MCU history is a whole lot of nothing, because these two leads, I'm sorry, they have no chemistry. So when they do get to making love with one another, it feels like a prerequisite love scene that you've seen in other epic, sweeping adventure drama things that don't have nearly as much ambition as this movie wants to have. So it does come across as just being like, it's so unnecessary. Why? Because the characters are, and I mean this in a figurative and literal way, these two leads are very robotic throughout the rest of the film up until probably the last 15 minutes, when all of a sudden they do need to demonstrate a little bit more breadth in their performances. And it's a shame, just because I feel, again, Gemma Chan and Richard Madden are solid performers. Give them something a little bit more to do. The one performance, aside from those two, that, again, kind of stood out to me and not in an overwhelmingly positive way is the youngest actor in the ensemble. And I don't want to place this on the actor, Leah McHugh as Sprite. I don't know if it's just my own kind of response to when child actors have to play older. And in the case of the character of Sprite, it's when a child actor who's clearly a preteen has to play and demonstrate like they're an old spirit who just happens to be trapped in a younger body. That is Sprite's whole thing, aside from making illusions, is that Sprite is always perpetually a preteen throughout the centuries, never matures or never grows into an adult, just always stays young. And every once in a while, they'll tap into this, but because there are so many characters that we have to introduce and establish their own set of conflicts and backgrounds, Sprite's longing to present as older, I forget about it until it suddenly becomes an issue of conflict. And then I'm like, oh, right, Sprite has this issue going on. And again, I don't want to place this on Leah as a performer, but the performance, it feels very unnatural. And I can't tell for the life of me if that is a purposeful choice on McHugh and Zhao's part for the Sprite character, or if it's just because it's my own kind of aversion and my own kind of resistance whenever I see a child actor playing, in the case of Sprite, way older. Like they're playing sort of at times serious, but at times comic relief. And it's just a weird kind of stilted, unnatural delivery that I'm like, am I supposed to laugh? Am I supposed to take that line seriously? It really kind of halted things for me at times whenever a lot of focus is placed on Sprite. Part of it also is because, oh yeah, Sprite's dilemma pops in here and there out of nowhere because, oh, we need to catch up with that character. And again, that's another one of the things with the film is it's ambitious in introducing this many characters to us at once without establishing them in prior films like what Marvel had done previously with the Avengers. It's certainly a gamble. The thing is, I feel the gamble paid off in the opposite way, where the leads are the least interesting part, and then the supporting characters actually have the more driving or more compelling narratives that I wish were expanded on a little bit more. Angelina Jolie as Thena. I actually kind of like what they were doing with her character. There is something of a parallel regarding dementia and Alzheimer's with the character of Thena, and Angelina Jolie actually plays that very well. It's a very subdued performance, but also really effective because it's Angelina Jolie. She does well with that. And I kind of wish that she had more of a prominent role, as that conflict within that particular character was one of the more interesting ones. Kumail Nanjiani absolutely delivers a lot of energy in his performance. A lot of his comedy beats don't work for me at times, but I do appreciate that he's got some enthusiasm, like some over-the-topness that he can play with a little bit. His character's motivation is the one that's the most back and forth for me, because there is this theme that, again, I'll revisit here about sort of the Eternals' devotion to their cause. Sort of an exploration of the more zealous nature of fundamentalist belief is at play. And Kumail's character of Kingo is at the crossroads of that inner conflict, where he appears to be one of the Eternals who has adapted the best to human civilization throughout the centuries. He's a famous Bollywood star and has held that career for several decades now. He is one of the characters who has one of the most apparent ties to humanity because he has a human valet who is also his confidant and friend, his Alfred, as they call him in the movie, who accompanies with him throughout his adventure and who is the one that a lot of Kingo's dialogue bounces off of. Like, they have a stronger dynamic together than him with the rest of his Eternals teammates. And so, if anything, he's the character who demonstrates a strong connection and a strong empathy or affinity for humanity. But at the same time, he's got this feeling of, I do genuinely believe in what we're doing as Eternals, even if it's at the expense of the human race. That could have been a more interesting dynamic to explore, his back and forth of like, do I fulfill my duties as a servant of the Celestials, or do I buck that duty in favor of, the human race, which I have come to appreciate, and this human that I've come to appreciate. It's never really resolved. He backs out of the last act fight and then just shows up again later. I never get the sense of like he had any kind of realization. And again, part of me is feeling like, is that something that they're going to expand on and explore in a sequel or in another MCU installment with the character? Who's to say? But the character who has he has one of the more fascinating kind of dynamics when it comes to this underlying theme of, is humanity worth it? And it's left very up in the air, either purposefully for a future installment or they just forgot about it just because we got a lot more characters. So that was weird. And finally, Brian Tyree Henry as Fastos. Again, this was another aspect of the film that has been touted up in the media a lot, which is he's the first out gay Marvel character. And you know what? Fastos, I'm glad they didn't play Arch with the character. It's handled well for what it is. It's not an overly distracting quality of the character that takes away from the main narrative thrust of the movie and his role in the main narrative thrust of the movie, but it works for what it is, and it works towards actually his motivations. He is the inventor, obviously a parallel with Fastos, and in modern times he has a husband and a son, and he outwardly says all the time, like, this is my family. I don't want to lose this family that I've built for myself. Especially when they decide, the main qualm with Fastos is they decide to tie in an actual real life tragedy into his indirect involvement, and that's supposed to kind of taint the character on the idea of, getting back in the fight. But then it's like he's back in the fight anyways because he wants to fight for his family's existence. That serves the character well. That backstory is a little kind of weird to just throw that suddenly into that character's particular dynamic. But for what he has to do in the present, it's fine. And it's more compelling than anything going on with Circe or even Ikaris. I kind of wish Fastos was more of a lead in this movie. Here, let's talk about the themes now. Throughout the film, there's this kind of debate, not just about their adherence to their predetermined roles as servants of the Celestials and what they were actually sent to Earth to do, but also about the worth of humanity. And I've mentioned this with characters like Circe, with Kingo, and with Fastos. Is humanity worth it? And they do this back and forth about humanity demonstrates the worst of itself and how an occurrence like Avengers Endgame kind of turned around the perspectives of a few of the Eternals. Like Salma Hayek's Ajax apparently had the come to Jesus moment about their roles and shifting that dynamic a little bit because of the sacrifice made by the heroes in Endgame. Even though they've been on Earth for centuries and have probably seen many instances of humanity sacrificing itself for the greater good or sacrificing itself for their fellow man. Again, it's that adherence to the universe that this movie's in that hampers that a little bit. There is the real life tragedy of Hiroshima that they decide to connect directly to Fastos and his indirect involvement in basically handing over the loaded gun of nuclear power to humanity. And it's kind of like, yeah, humanity is bad, but this whole idea of like the hands-off approach, this is an argument for why you're hands-off, maybe. And then you have other characters in the dynamic, like I forgot about Druid, who has the ability to control other people's minds and is one of the biggest kind of advocates for we just need to run things. And in modern days, he is. Like, he has a commune set up in the forest where he basically controls everyone into being placid and compliant. For a long while in the movie, I thought he was going to turn out he was like a villain or something, because his power kind of hints at him having a bit more of a dominating or authoritative kind of streak in him. But again, this movie kind of subverts that expectation a little bit, and he ends up helping the team in their plan to save the Earth, which is weird because up until that point, he really didn't seem to care much for the autonomy of humans. Like, up until the point that they recruit him, is he kind of saying, like, things are better now that I just run all these people's lives. Like, their individuality is overrated. Why should we fight for that? Why should we fight for them striving to exist on their own? And at no point do I really believe the flip in his ideology on that. Then now he's going to be gung-ho about, you know what, let's save these humans and their free thinking. So there's that. There's that idea of, like, some characters are all about, like, being hands-on. Others are like, oh, we got to stay as hands-off as possible. And neither really comes to a satisfying kind of culmination on this statement on humanity's worth. Again, that might be stuff that they explore later on, which brings me to my final aspect of Eternals overall, which is it doesn't matter if this movie succeeds or fails, because believe me, Marvel has a plan in motion to keep the narrative, or at least to keep these characters going. They've had that ever since probably Incredible Hulk, because we haven't had a Hulk movie since, but they still found a way to bring that character back in Avengers movies, in a Thor movie. They still found a way to make the character play a significant role, even if he didn't necessarily have his own franchise to anchor. And that's something I feel they can still do if it turns out Eternals wasn't the gamble that paid off for them as much as they'd hoped. They have it set up by the end of the film that you can have these characters come back. You can have either in their own sequel, which probably is what will happen anyways, or in other franchises. Like Guardians of the Galaxy, a few of these characters would be right at home there. Or whatever other cosmic characters they plan to bring into the mix in this new phase of the MCU. There's going to be a home for these characters, for the Eternals, no matter what. So this is certainly a gamble from a creative standpoint. It's ambitious. It reaches for the stars regarding the concepts and ideas it wants to introduce into the greater Marvel mythology, but it's also a very risk-free ambition, because there is a safety net of Marvel will figure out a way to reintegrate the brand. They'll figure out a way to make the characters that do, stick around in the public consciousness, to bring them back, because that's what brand synergy is. That's why I'm very whatever about Marvel and about superhero franchises overall at this point. There's things to really like about Eternals, and there's things to criticize about Eternals. And it's just whatever. It's another gear in the machine, and there'll be more like it after, but hopefully there'll be more that achieve the ambition it started here, that actually see some of the more daunting visions that Chloe had for this particular aspect of the universe come to full fruition. Again, like I said, I just want to see Chloe get more work after this. I want to see her creativity just completely unchained without having to play it safe with this particular sandbox that she was allowed to construct in. There you go. Oh yeah, post-credit scenes. Yeah, one post-credit scene, you're going to have a lot of people get very, very loud. And the other one, okay.